Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Glad to be here.
Today, we're really getting into the economic arguments around some proposed tariff policies, specifically the ones often linked to the former president.
Yeah, there's a lot of noise out there, claims flying around. You, the listener, have probably heard quite a bit.
Exactly. And we want to try and, unpack what's really going on behind those claims.
We've got a couple of sources we're leaning on. One's an analysis called An Examination of Trump's Tariff Policies.
Right, more of a straight economic look.
And the other is a commentary. Trump's tariffs are unbelievable, literally. Bit more pointed, that one.
So our goal, our mission for this deep dive is to break down the big claims, like who really pays these tariffs? Could they actually replace income tax? What about manufacturing jobs, trade deals?
We want to sift through the rhetoric, look
Yeah.
at the economics, and give you some clear takeaways.
Okay, so let's start with that first big one. Who actually pays? You hear a lot about foreign countries footing the bill.
Right, but the legal reality, according to the analysis piece, is pretty clear under U.S. law.
Which is?
Tariffs are taxes. They're levied on U.S. companies, the importers, when the goods cross the border into the U.S.
So it's American businesses paying U.S. customs, not China, not Mexico, not anyone else directly.
Correct. The idea that foreigners are directly paying these taxes into some kind of external revenue service, as the commentary puts it, well, that's just not how the system is set up.
It's a fundamental point to grasp, because if you get that wrong, then these other much bigger claims start to seem plausible, don't they?
Exactly. Like the idea that you could use this money supposedly coming from overseas to just eliminate income tax.
Yeah, let's tackle that one. Abolishing the individual income tax entirely, that's a huge promise. What kind of money are we talking about needing?
Okay, so the sources suggest we'd need about $2.4 trillion annually.
2.4 trillion just from tariffs.
Right. And to get that much revenue, the analysis calculates you'd need an average tariff rate across all imports of around 75%.
75. Wow. I mean, current rates are mostly single digits, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. So imagine slapping a 75% tax on almost everything coming into the country.
What would actually happen? I mean, it sounds like prices would just go through the roof.
They would, dramatically. So much so that American consumers, businesses, they just stop buying a lot of imported stuff, or buy far less.
Which means fewer imports.
Which means the tariff revenue itself collapses. It's sort of self-defeating.
Ah, okay. So the very thing you need to generate the revenue, the imports would dry up because the tariffs are too high.
Precisely. And that's not even mentioning the damage to U.S. exports, because lots of our exports rely on imported parts. Plus, the almost certain global trade disruption. The commentary calls it a mathematical impossibility.
Right. And warns about, like, a global recession risk.
Yeah, it's not a small thing.
Okay. So maybe not the whole income tax. What about the more, let's say, modest version? Just replacing income tax for people earning under $200,000.
Well, it's smaller, yes, but the analysis suggests it still falls way short. Even accounting for people changing buying habits, maybe buying fewer taxed goods, and factoring in less investment and spending generally because prices are higher.
It still doesn't add up.
No, you'd likely still be hundreds of billions of dollars short each year.
And there's another angle here too, isn't there? Who actually ends up paying more if you swap income tax for tariffs?
Yes, that's crucial. It would be a very regressive policy shift. Meaning it hits lower and middle income households harder. As the commentary notes, people who earn less spend a much bigger chunk of their income on, everyday goods, food, clothes, electronics, the stuff often subject to tariffs.
So they bear the brunt of the price increases. It's like a hidden tax increase, especially on necessities.
Exactly. You're swapping a progressive income tax where higher earners pay a larger percentage for a consumption tax that disproportionately burdens those with less disposable income.
Okay. So the whole tariffs replace income tax idea, whether fully or partially, seems, well, not grounded in economic reality based on this analysis.
Very much, yeah.
Let's pivot then. If the revenue side is problematic, what about the impact on trade itself? Specifically, U.S. exports and this issue of foreign retaliation.
Yeah, this is where past experience is quite telling. The analysis piece reminds us that during the last administration, when the U.S. imposed tariffs,
Other countries hit back.
right, they retaliated with their own tariffs on American goods. It's standard playbook in trade disputes.
And remember, the agricultural sector got hit particularly hard, didn't it? Farmers were really struggling.
Absolutely. The U.S. government ended up spending, get this, $61 billion in bailout funds for farmers hurt by retaliation, mostly from China.
$61 billion. How did that compare to the tariff money actually collected?
Well, here's the kicker, highlighted in the commentary, that $61 billion was about 92% of the total revenue collected from those specific China tariffs during that time.
Wow. So almost all the money taken in through those tariffs went straight back out the door to compensate for the damage caused by the retaliation against those tariffs.
Precisely. It really undermines the idea that tariffs automatically open foreign markets. Often they seem to lead to markets closing for U.S. exporters.
Which then affects investment decisions here at home, presumably.
You bet. Why would a company invest heavily in U.S. production for export if they think there's a high chance those foreign markets will slap on retaliatory tariffs? It creates uncertainty.
Makes sense. Okay, now this ties into another major claim, that tariffs will bring back manufacturing jobs. Big time. Reshoring, right?
Yes, that's a central promise. Bring jobs back by making imports more expensive and domestic production more attractive.
But our sources seem to point out a kind of contradiction here. Something about revenue versus jobs.
There's a fundamental tension, yes. Think about it. Tariff revenue comes from imports.
Right. Tax and goods coming in.
But the goal of boosting manufacturing jobs is often about replacing those imports with stuff made domestically. So if you succeed in replacing imports,
your imports go down.
Yeah.
And if your imports go down,
your tariff revenue goes down. You can't really maximize both at the same time.
Exactly. The analysis puts it clearly. You could, theoretically, have high revenue if imports stay high, but that means you haven't created many new manufacturing jobs replacing those imports. Or you could have a big boost in manufacturing replacing imports, but then your big pot of tariff revenue doesn't materialize because the imports aren't there to be taxed as much.
It's an either, realistically, not both hand on a massive scale.
That seems to be the economic logic, yes.
Does it get into which specific industries might win or lose here?
Not in extreme detail, but the general point is industries using lots of imported components would see their costs rise. That hurts competitiveness.
Okay.
Some domestic producers competing against imports might get a short-term boost, sure, but then you have the higher input costs, plus the risk of retaliation hitting their exports. It's complex. This whole idea, taken to its extreme, sometimes sounds like aiming for autarky, like making absolutely everything here, total self-sufficiency.
Yeah, that concept comes up, producing everything domestically, no matter the cost difference.
Is that feasible?
Yeah.
Or even desirable?
Both sources basically say no, not for a modern, complex economy. It leads to impoverishment, frankly.
Why?
Well, in an economy like the U.S., which is usually near full employment, if you suddenly decide to make, say, all our own electronics and all our own textiles and everything else we import.
You need workers, resources.
Exactly. You have to pull those workers and resources away from other things we're already producing, maybe things we're actually really good and efficient at producing.
So we stop making as much of thing A to make thing B, which we used to import more cheaply.
Right, and you add complications like, if other policies are reducing immigration, where does the extra labor come from to suddenly staff all these new factories? It ignores comparative advantage, the basic idea that it makes sense to focus on what you do best and trade for the rest.
So trying to do everything yourself just makes you less efficient and poorer overall.
That's the standard economic view, yes.
Okay, one more specific claim to unpack. These alleged 200 trade deals. That number has been floated. What's the reality check there?
Yeah, the 200 deals claim is highly questionable, to put it mildly.
How so?
Well, for starters, as the analysis notes, there aren't even 200 countries in the world, so the number itself is suspect. And beyond the number, there's just a real lack of detail. Which countries? What do the deals involve? It's very murky. The only one mentioned with any frequency is a potential deal with the UK.
So not much substance known about these supposed 200 deals.
Very little. And it raises another interesting point, which is if any of these deals did exist and involved the U.S. actually lowering our own trade barriers or tariffs to get concessions from others.
That would reduce the potential tariff revenue even further.
Exactly. It directly contradicts the idea of generating trillions from tariffs if you're simultaneously striking deals to lower them.
The internal logic seems tangled.
It does seem that way when you lay it all out.
So bringing it all together,
Yeah.
the commentary piece uses that strong phrase, literally unbelievable.
Yeah.
What does it suggest is the driving force behind pushing these policies if the economic argument seems so shaky?
The commentary frames it as a kind of political strategy. It offers this appealing package, right? Promises of trillions from foreigners, tax cuts, jobs, fair trade, all from one simple action, tariffs.
A silver bullet sort of idea?
Kind of. And the author suggests it might be about creating a Churchillian moment,
No.
projecting strength, decisiveness.
Bluster trumps all measure of reality, is the quote, I think.
Yeah, the idea is that the performance of being tough on trade, the symbolic impact, might be valued more than the underlying economic coherence or the likely real-world consequences.
A focus on perception over economic principles.
That's the interpretation offered in the commentary. Yes.
Okay, so let's just quickly recap the main economic takeaways from our deep dive.
Sure.
1. Tariffs are paid by U.S. importers, legally speaking, not foreign entities directly.
Right. Point 1.
2. Using tariff revenue to replace income tax, even partially, looks mathematically impossible without causing huge economic disruption and likely falling short anyway.
Highly unrealistic.
3. Foreign retaliation against U.S. exports is a real and predictable consequence, often offsetting any revenue gained. Remember the farm bailouts?
Yep, that $61 billion figure sticks.
4. The goals of massive revenue generation from tariffs and massive domestic job creation replacing tariffed imports are fundamentally contradictory. You likely get one or the other, not both.
That tension is key.
5. Autarky, or total self-sufficiency, is generally seen by economists as a path to becoming poorer, not richer, due to inefficiency.
Ignores comparative advantage.
And 6. That claim of 200 trade deals lacks evidence, and any real deals involving the U.S. lowering barriers would actually reduce potential tariff revenue.
Very questionable claim.
So as we wrap up, maybe a final thought for you, the listener.
Yeah.
Consider the gap we've discussed between the stated goals, the big promises, and the likely economic consequences based on the analyses we looked at.
What does that gap tell you?
Right. When policy claims seem to run up against basic economic principles, what does that suggest? Are there other factors maybe driving the conversation, things beyond pure economics?
Good questions to ponder. Perhaps you might want to look into the history of tariffs, see how they've played out before, or maybe investigate how different industries today, agriculture, tech, retail, view these kinds of trade policies.
Definitely plenty more to explore. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Thanks for the discussion.